like sands through the hourglass. These are the days of our lives. All right, by now you've all heard head coach at Michigan, Sherrone Moore, is out, fired yesterday for cause by the university. I'm sure you have heard the story by now. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that part here in this video. We'll just kind of recap it and then move on. But apparently he was under investigation or was suspected of having a relationship with a staffer. Sherrone Moore is married with kids. Besides that, though, that there's a policy at Michigan and everywhere else for that matter, sort of an anti-fraternization policy. You can't sleep with people that work for you. That's just a well-known thing. That's the accusation. Apparently there was an investigation. They found out it was true. They fired Sherrone Moore. After that, he had, this is my own word, this is just from what it looks like to me, had some sort of a breakdown. I'm not going to kick this guy when he's down in that respect. Now, we're lucky this situation ended the way it did. If some of the stories that are out there are to be believed, then this thing could have ended way worse than it did. And I can't pretend to get inside Sherrone Moore's head, but he clearly had some sort of breakdown. Apparently, he drove to the staffer's house after he was fired. And while there, and it gets a little unclear here, he either threatened to hurt himself, threatened to hurt her, or both. The cops were called, the police were called. They were able to track him down through some sort of GPS through his phone, I guess, and he was at a church. If one of the things I read, he was at a church. They found him. They detained him or arrested him without incident. And the charges, we'll see what comes of all that. But from a football point of view, Michigan is without a head coach. Sherrone Moore is fired. It's a little interesting to me, and this is not just Michigan. This happens a lot. Supposedly the university had known about this for a while, or was tipped off about this a while ago, or suspected this a while ago. There's reports out from national college football reporters who are now claiming to have known this going back months, but just didn't say anything about it. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But the timing on these things is always interesting to me. And look, I'm a skeptic by nature about everything. So anytime I hear that a coach is being fired for cause, I look at their record. I look at how successful they are. And then you add that to sort of the timing of this, or the story, or the reporting that Michigan had known about this for a while and was looking into it. And the first thing that goes through my mind is, if Michigan beats Ohio State 2 weeks ago and is in the college football playoff or the Big Ten championship game or whatever it is, does any of this ever come out? Is he ever fired? I'm not accusing Michigan of taking that wait and see approach on purpose. I'm just a skeptic by nature. And every time I see a coach fired for cause, I'm thinking, okay, they must have wanted to get rid of him, and then they find the reason. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but it's interesting to me that apparently everybody knew about this for months, but none of the reporters said anything. Michigan didn't do anything until after the season, when they were 9-3, had lost to Ohio State, weren't in the Big Ten championship game, and weren't going to the playoffs. And then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we've had this ongoing investigation, and we know you've been sleeping with a staffer. There's reports that he got her pregnant. There's reports of an abortion. I don't know how much or if any of that is true. I'm glad nobody got hurt yesterday physically. In the end, I'm glad Sherrone Moore didn't hurt himself or someone else. And, I hope he gets better mentally and all that. But it's obviously a mess of a situation here. But from a football point of view, and look, real life is way more important than football. You're talking about a guy here in Sherrone Moore, a husband, a father. I'm sure this other woman is going through it now. And all of that aside, the human sort of collateral damage here is way worse than the fact that Michigan doesn't have a football coach. But, I'm not TMZ or entertainment tonight. I'm here to talk about football, and so that's what I'm going to try to keep it to that from here on out. But that's the recap of the story, at least as I understand it, allegedly, reportedly. Okay, so now let's move on. What's Michigan going to do for their head coach? Well, they were in this situation not that long ago. Not exactly, but similarly, right? They had a head coach embroiled in controversy. He moved on late in the coaching search cycle, which seems to get moved up further and further every single year now. You got schools like Penn State and UCLA and Oklahoma State firing their coaches basically in September now, beginning of October. So, yeah, this is late in the coaching cycle, even though it's only the second week of December. This is late in the coaching cycle. So Michigan found themselves in this situation a few years ago when Harbaugh left while under investigation to take a job in the NFL. Michigan finds themselves in a similar situation now. So they've got to go out and replace Sherrone Moore. So what are they going to do? I don't know any names for Michigan head coach that you can't Google and read for yourself everywhere else. I'm no insider. I'm a fan just like you are. I read this stuff and react to it. That's all I do. I'm not here to give you any breaking news about who Michigan's hiring or some name that isn't out there somewhere else already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over some of the names that are out there, some of the names that are being floated around as a potential replacement for Sherrone Moore at Michigan, and give you my thoughts on it and how likely I think it is maybe that Michigan would go that direction. Let's start with 3 names that are sort of top of everybody's pyramid if you happen to be looking for a coach right now. None of these coaches, I don't think, are going to say yes to the Michigan job. Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman is getting sort of mentioned for a couple of different possible jobs right now, one being the New York Giants in the NFL. He, of course, the Notre Dame head coach, led them to the playoffs last year, nearly led them there again this year. We've been over that a ton over the last 2 weeks. I think he's a good coach, though. He recruits well. The players love him. He's a good coach. It would be a great hire, I think, if Michigan could get him. I don't think he's going there. I don't think a guy who has the option of Notre Dame in the NFL would say no to both of those to take the job at Michigan right now. Just don't think it would happen. Not that Michigan's a bad job. I don't guess. I don't think Marcus Freeman's got any interest in leaving Notre Dame to go to Michigan when the NFL is also an option. It seems to me you'd stay at Notre Dame right now before you'd go to Michigan. A little messy at Michigan right now. So I don't think that's an option. If you're Michigan, do you call Marcus Freeman? Probably, but I don't think you call him twice. That kind of call him, move on, so you can check his name off your list. Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning's another one that obviously has had success at Oregon. Great regular seasons at Oregon. Won the Big Ten championship last year. Did not win the Big Ten championship this year, but is in the playoffs for the second year in a row and is obviously one of the hotter, newer head coaches in all of college football. Very passionate, a ton of energy, can recruit. He's a defensive guy, which kind of fits with what Michigan's sort of culture and brand and style of football is. Again, if you're Dan Lanning at Oregon, I don't know. In general, over the last 100 years, sort of the history of college football, is Michigan a better job than Oregon? Yeah. Over the course of the history of football, Michigan is considered, probably one of the best 5 or 6 jobs in football, 7 or 8, whatever, and Oregon isn't. But Dan Lanning's not considering this job at some point in history. He would be considering this today. And I just don't know why you would leave Oregon to go to another team in the same conference that right now you're ahead of at Oregon. If you do like a pecking order in the Big Ten. And look, I know Michigan won the Natty 2 years ago, and I'm taking anything away from that. They were pretty good this year at 9-3. It's not like they fell off a cliff and went 4-8, but they're not where Oregon is, in my opinion. He's got almost unlimited money there via Nike to work the NIL, transfer portal, player contracts, those sorts of things. So if you're Michigan, do you call him? Yeah. Do you spend a lot of time on it? I don't think so. I think he's pretty happy at Oregon, and I'd be surprised if he left to take what I think at best would be a lateral move to Michigan. I don't see that happening. And then Curt Cignetti at Indiana is another one. And, he just signed a huge extension and raise a few months ago when his name was initially brought up for the Penn State job. But y'all know my opinions on these coaching contracts. I don't care how many years a coaching contract is for, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. If the coach wants to leave, he's going to leave. I mean, that's all there is to it. So the fact that he just signed an extension or a contract, or he's got 10 years left on his contract, or whatever it is, that's not the reason I don't think Cignetti would take that job. I think Cignetti's going to stay at Indiana. I mean, why would he leave there? He's done almost everything in Indiana you could potentially do anywhere else. They're headed in the right direction. I don't think any of those three names, those would be sort of the top three. Hey, is there any way we can get these three guys? And maybe you spend one day calling those three coaches and their agents and their representatives. But I think pretty quickly here, Michigan's going to have to move on from names like that. So then you start looking at either coaches that maybe are at some lower level schools but have showed a lot of potential, or defensive coordinators at different places. Michigan, when they've been at their best, has been a defense-first team, gritty, hard-nosed, line of scrimmage, sort of what we would consider almost kind of old-school Big Ten football. That seems to me to be when Michigan is at their best, and that kind of just screams defensive coordinator to me. So when you start talking about some defensive coordinators around college football who could potentially be ready to take that next step, I've seen Jesse Minter mentioned. He was the defensive coordinator at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh the last couple of years that Harbaugh was the head coach in Michigan, which of course included the national title season. He left with Harbaugh to go to the NFL. I'm doubtful on this one because it seems to me that Michigan, whether they want to or not, needs to turn the page completely from everything that happened in the Jim Harbaugh era. And I'm not here to relitigate Connor Stallions and everything that happened there, but Sherrone Moore was on that staff. Harbaugh left late in the cycle. I think it was February when he finally announced he was leaving to go to the NFL. There wasn't a lot of coaching candidates left to call at that point for Michigan. They were under potential NCAA sanctions coming through the Connor Stallions investigation. It would have been hard to get a high-level coach to come there at that time. So you remember they promoted Sherrone Moore from within, a guy that was on the Harbaugh staff. Now here we are 2 years later, and while I don't expect this to result in any sort of NCAA investigation or sanctions or vacated wins or whatever the rumors were with the Connor Stallions stuff, it's still, here you are again, if you're Michigan, just a messy situation caused by your coach. And I don't know, I think it would be better for Michigan to move on completely from that entire era. And so to bring back somebody like Jesse Minter, who was there under Harbaugh when the Connor Stallion stuff was going on, not that that means anything. I'm not saying that, Jesse Minter would come in there and he would do the same underhanded crap, or he would get in trouble just like Moore did because he's part of the same Harbaugh regime. It's not that. It just seems like after the way the last two coaches have now left at Michigan, you need a clean start there in terms of the coach and the coaching staff. And I just don't think you want to sort of turn back the clock to a Jesse Minter because of the ties he had to the Harbaugh coaching staff. By the way, because this was pointed out to me on Twitter yesterday, I have been predicting Sherrone Moore would be fired after this season for over a year now. Not because of this, not because of why he actually ended up getting fired, though. I didn't know any of that. I had no idea any of that crap was going on. I thought Sherrone Moore was just going to be a temporary stopgap for Michigan for the reasons we just talked about. Harbaugh was hired late in the cycle. They didn't have a lot of options. It was a messy situation with pending NCAA investigation and possible sanction. It would have been hard to get a high-level coach. So, hey, let's just promote the guy that was interim coach while Harbaugh was suspended all those games, Sherrone Moore. We'll get through these sanctions, figure out how bad it is. Then we can go out and hire the coach we really want. That's how I thought it was going to go down. So he did get hired. He did get fired, but not for the reasons I thought. Anyway, so I don't think it would be a good idea for Michigan to hire Jesse Minter. It's just too much of a sort of flash to the past for me. Regardless of how good of a head coach Jesse Minter may or may not end up being. Glenn Schumann at Georgia. I can speak for Georgia fans here. I'm kind of surprised his name hasn't been mentioned for other jobs already during this coaching cycle. And maybe it has, and it just, it doesn't get the headlines or whatever. Maybe he has been called, I don't know. But this guy, Glenn Schumann, now he's never been a head coach, but he's been a defensive coordinator, assistant coach, or graduate assistant under either Nick Saban or Kirby Smart for the better part of a decade or more. He's been a part of 6 national championship winning teams, and he's a hell of a defensive coordinator. He fits the Michigan mold in that respect to me. Now, he's sort of labeled as a Southeastern guy because that's where he spent the majority of his career. So you wonder about fit when it comes to college football, head coach. You know, is that something he would even be interested in? Is he sort of holding out maybe for an SEC job or a Southeastern Conference job or something in, this region of the United States? I've got no idea. But I think maybe that would be something to consider if you're Michigan. I don't want to lose him as a Georgia fan. I don't think he's not Dan Lanning, I'll tell you that, in terms of his defensive coordinator ability. I think, but he's good. And he knows what it takes to win because he's been around it for over a decade between his time with Alabama and Nick Saban and now Georgia and Kirby Smart. And the Indiana defensive coordinator. I don't know how much of what goes on at Indiana is Curt Cignetti and how much of it is him delegating duties down the line. But what about the Indiana defensive coordinator, Brian Haynes? You look at what Indiana did to Ohio State the other day, and it might be one of the most impressive defensive performances of the season. And I don't want to talk about Indiana in a way that makes them seem like they're not talented, because they obviously are. But he could have way better talent at Michigan to work with defensively. Brian Haynes, the defense coordinator in Indiana, could than he gets at Indiana. What they did to Ohio State, I still can't believe it. Held Ohio State to 10 points, just unbelievable to me. Again, no head coaching experience. Michigan tried that with Sherrone Moore, ended up not going so well. So I don't know if any of these 3 guys would actually be sort of anywhere near the top of the list for Michigan if they're looking to go after somebody with real head coaching experience. But I do think those are 3 defensive coordinators that I've seen mentioned in various articles on the internet this morning that at some point probably will get a shot at as a head coach somewhere. If it's not Michigan now, it'll be somebody else at some point down the line. And then you move on to the coaches that are currently head coaches, have had some amount of success at what most people would consider to be maybe a tier or 2 school below Michigan in terms of just overall possibility of winning, right? Clark Lee at Vandy. Maybe. Unlike some of the other names we mentioned, Clark Lee is in the SEC now, head coach at Vandy, has put together 2 really good years in a row this year, 10-2, just outside the playoffs. He has some experience in the Midwest. He was a Notre Dame coach for a long time before taking the job at Vandy, so he's familiar with that part of the country and sort of what it takes to win and recruit in that part of the country. Like a lot of these other coaches, he's recently signed an extension and gotten a raise, and he says all the right things in terms of wanting to stay at Vandy. But we all know every coach says that until they don't. So I think that's a possibility, at least somebody that Michigan would call and say, hey, gauge their interest. Is there any possibility we can get you to sit down for a meeting? Whatever. I think that's a name to keep an eye on. Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. Another guy that keeps saying, I'm happy at Arizona State. I'm staying here forever. There's an interview was out with him yesterday, a clip. I don't know if it was a podcast or an interview or what it was, but, they're losing their quarterback, Sam Leavitt. And while they didn't come out and say it, it sure seems like Kenny Dillingham already knows who the quarterback's going to be next year in Arizona State. And it's somebody that is entering the portal that isn't even open yet. So I'm not saying he's tampering, but I think we all know what goes on in college football now. I mean, these coaches, they kind of know who's entering the portal. So anyway, he appears to be happy and plans on staying at Arizona State. That could all change, though, if the phone rings and it's Michigan on the other end. His name was mentioned for some of the other coaching vacancies that opened up earlier in the cycle. So Kenny Dillingham obviously made the playoffs last year at Arizona State. A little bit of a disappointing season this year. Sam Leavitt, of course, got hurt and then sat out the last half of the season, and they sort of fell off in the Big 12 a little bit this year. But I think he's proven that he's a pretty good head coach. Maybe that's somebody Michigan would call. Mike Elko's another name I hear mentioned. I don't know about that. I think Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss to take the LSU job has sort of rewired our brains to think that that's normal. I would find it hard to believe that a guy like Mike Elko, who in his second year at Texas A&M, a place with nearly unlimited resources, They're in the SEC. They're in the state of Texas. They've got a ton of built-in advantages in terms of recruiting in-state talent from the high school point of view. They've got some money advantages. I find it hard to believe that somebody like Mike Elko in their second year in a situation like that, where they find themselves in the playoffs, they've gotten that program, Texas A&M, to a spot they've never been before. Texas A&M never been in a playoff. They've been in the SEC for almost 15 years, never won it, still haven't even played at an SEC championship game, but he's sort of got them to a point they've been trying to get for a long time. Would he leave Texas A&M to take that job up there in Michigan? Now, he's shown the ability to bounce around quickly. He was only at Duke for a couple of years before he bounced for Texas A&M, but he's another one that seems pretty happy there. I really don't know which direction Michigan's going to go. Those names that I just went over, whether they're defensive coordinators, the sort of Mount Rushmore of wish list coaches, Kalen DeBoer is a name I've heard mentioned. I don't know. Look, Ole Miss is in the playoffs, and Lane Kiffin left there to go to LSU, and we all couldn't believe it for a reason. Why is somebody going to leave a playoff team? I don't think that means that a bunch of coaches who are in the playoffs are looking to sort of follow that example. So when you talk about Mike Elko or some of these other names that are on this list of teams that are currently in the playoffs, head coaches I'm talking about. Now, coordinators, yeah, somebody like a Glenn Schumann or the DC at Indiana, I could see them maybe taking the call from Michigan. They're not current head coaches, but head coaches with teams in the playoffs, at least I hope what happened with Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, and LSU, I hope that's the exception to the rule. I think it's terrible to see these coaches leaving playoff teams to take jobs at non-playoff teams. But these are some of the names that I'm hearing that are out there, whether they're DCs, coaches at some of these what we would consider sort of step-down schools from Michigan that may be looking to make the step up, or you want to go Mount Rushmore. Kalen DeBoer, Brian Kelly has been mentioned. But first of all, Brian Kelly, I think, is a hard no. They got to get somebody that is squeaky clean in there. And I'm not here to relitigate, the Brian Kelly mess at what Notre Dame, was it with the student and the camera thing? I'm not. But you just look at what all has happened at Michigan over the last 3 or 4 years. From the highest of highs, undefeated national championship team, to the lowest of lows with cheating allegations and Connor Stallions and now Sherrone Moore and being arrested. And, did he threaten to kill somebody or did he threaten to kill himself? And it seems to me like they really can't afford to roll the dice right now on somebody with any type of smoke in their background. They need somebody squeaky clean, it seems like to me. Anyway, who do y'all think Michigan is going to go after? I'm particularly interested to hear from the Michigan fans. If you have a wish list or if you're hearing something, a lot of times Michigan fans, more like ear to the ground type of stuff than your average idiot like me. Maybe y'all are hearing things I'm not hearing. Again, I'm not an insider. I read the same articles on the internet and read the same tweets and all that y'all do. So I'm more of a just, here's the names I'm hearing. Here's what I think about them. I'm not here to give you any groundbreaking news on coaching searches. But anyway, Sherrone Moore out at Michigan, lasted 2 years. Michigan coaching search yet again. Appreciate you watching. Let me know what you think down below. Have a good morning.